there is a real personal interaction, like Keystone Industrial Zone, between the Northerners and the Southerners. Good. All kind of exchanges, you know. These carefully selected, beautiful Korean girls, cheerleaders coming here, you know, to cheerlead for some for university game or so whichever. You know what I'm talking about. So these people are very carefully selected, and they are smart enough to keep their mouths shut. But not all of them. Some of them will tell something, stories with suspect, or what they have seen and tell. So, exchange it, and it has an additional advantage, because we have to think what will happen next, day after. Because in the current situation, it's a complete disaster. It's a social disaster, it's an economic disaster. It's time to start redeveloping the country now, when it can be done easier and much cheaper. And exchanges, investment in infrastructure are ways to do so.
Regarding the South Korean government's, in my opinion, premature discussions on reunification and the committee that they're trying to set up, and as well as just the conversation, discourse they're trying to lead. What your opinion is on that?
Very complicated. One member of one of these committees. Yes. Yes. So what I would say. It's a bit complicated. Why? The South Korean left usually accuses North Koreans, when the South Korean right begins to talk about unification, South Korean right, left always assumes that they are talking about unification by absorption, and between you and me, left is right. Correct. Because there is one bad news. The only way of unification, how unification can happen, is revolution in North Korea followed by regime collapse and absorption. Question is, should we talk about it openly? Too openly, well, it's suicidal for any South Korean politician to say so. Because the South Korean public is deadly afraid of the idea of unification, especially unification by absorption. They prefer to daydream about some slow, peaceful unification, which is a completely impossible fantasy, but it sells very well, and it keeps people quiet and make sure they will sleep quietly every night. Because otherwise they will start calculating and they will come to a correct decision that unification is going to be ruinously expensive. Question is, bad things happen, whether you like it or not. I've never seen somebody who would like to die. Occasionally, maybe some people are mentioned, but for the rule, but everybody does. So it's a bit like, my usual comparison is you live in San Francisco, in Tokyo, on a seismic fault. You know that there is a very high probability, some people say close to 100%, that sooner or later a major earthquake will happen. Is it bad if government talks about it? Probably. But when I look at the position of the local left, Andrei Lankov, I think sometimes I feel that these people believe in magic. Like a taboo word. If you don't mention a tiger, tiger will never come. I'm sorry, there are tigers here, and there is nobody but tigers. The only way of unification is unification by absorption. So I'm sort of slightly optimistic that at least people begin to talk about it. Always quoting the hard and very unpalatable truths in all the sweet words, and also trying to play down, this is why I disagree with the government, play down the economic hardship, because one of their messages, unification is tebak, which I would translate, unification is bow. So, tebak, how would you translate tebak? Bonanza? Jackpot, well, this comes from jackpot, it's something. It's not. I would say unification is something like that. But it might happen, it is beyond everybody's control. If you have revolution in North Korea, and if Chinese tanks don't come, well, Russians in Crimea usually, this showed a very interesting way how it's possible. It will not be Chinese tanks, it will be unknown tanks. Yes. 2,000 unknown tanks. If there's 2,000, and this very polite crews, as in Russian media, the Russian forces in Crimea are now usually referred to the polite people. So, the polite tank crews are not, if they are not coming, what will happen? Can South Koreans say no, if you see crowds of North Koreans behaving like East Germans behaved 20 years ago, 25 years ago. No, they can't. And it's going to be very expensive, going to be very painful, and will essentially will be a major hit for people of your age group. Yes, but this is not what government can afford to say, honestly. But the idea that they at least are talking about such probability is probably good. Because no amount of talking about peaceful unification, gradual unification is not going to make this happen, because it's just physically impossible. I can go elaborate in some details why, if you like. I believe you first. Okay. I believe you first. Oh no, you just, yeah.
Yeah, if we actually keep the idea of unification, which one do you think is most probable to happen? The peace treaty between South Korea and North Korea and recognition of each other's nation, or unification?
First, I think unification or what first?
Unification or peace treaty between two Koreas. The end of the
They are not mutually exclusive. I believe unification is significantly more likely. Peace treaty I would support, even though I don't see how it can be drawn. You see the major issue with peace treaty. South Korea doesn't exist. And North Korea doesn't exist either, according to the official mythology. And neither side is willing to jettison this mythology. So you probably have to draft, but lawyers are paid extremely high salaries to get around such issues. So they probably can devise some nice name, not a peace treaty, but something. Reconciliation and peacekeeping treaty program, something. But right now I see that unification is significant. And again, peace treaty does prolong unification, because I repeat myself, the only way how unification might happen, and this probability is quite high in the long run, is an rebellion from the law, which can be provoked by some, like it happened in Tunisia, like it happened in Romania, by some minor incident in a city of which you have never heard about. Or it may be a result of some unsuccessful or even successful military coup, open clash of the leadership. A lot of probabilities. I would not dare to predict, because nobody knows. But I think it's more likely that any kind of peace treaty, and even there is a peace treaty, its existence, if there is a peace treaty, its existence will have little if any impact on the unification.
Another question?
Yes. Somebody wasn't asked questions. Yeah.
Lieutenant Choi, U.S. Army. I have two questions actually. What is the North Koreans' views on capitalism, and why? And the second question is, the U.S. forces are withdrawing their forces from South Korea significantly. Do you think that'll affect aggression or possible peace treaty talks in the future?
Not much. As I have said, if they want to see U.S. forces, if they want to present U.S. forces as being present on the peninsula, Marines guard of the embassy will suffer. If they have a political decision to have a peace treaty, 25,000 or 30,000 is not a big deal. So I don't think it will have much impact. Maybe it's a good gesture which will help to drive tensions low. I would support it within certain limits. However, having said that, it's not going to have much impact. Talking about capitalism, my official line is, of course, capitalism is bad. It's an unhuman, society of, and they are being told these stories. And what is interesting, in the past they used to say that capitalism is also a society where people are very poor. They don't say it anymore because they know that people are watching this South Korean soap operas. So they basically say it's a society where people might be not that poor, but they're still very unhappy because of all possible social evils, inequality, national degradation, environment pollution, and so on, which cannot exist in our beautiful parent system.
Yeah, but
Just a small something.
Okay.
But what is fine, if you talk to the North Koreans and ask, they very often listen and hear how they say, in the times of socialism, talking about their own country. And it seems that for a significant number of people, socialism is not the current system. North Korea. It's a system which existed under Kim Il Sung and briefly after his death. So they don't see themselves as a really socialist country. They sort of understand that they are, in a certain sense, capitalist economy. But anyway, yes.
Now, I was just wondering because it sounds like they've started implementing capitalistic ideas in allowing the people to keep some of their
Yes, yeah.
harvest
Yeah, yeah.
with 30% of their harvest.
Without admitting it. Officially, they are not family. They are not family. They just an enthusiastic teams of workers. Team of workers who happen to come from one family. So it's true. But talking about capitalist ideas, they have been implemented since mid-1990s on large scale. Otherwise, many more North Koreans would starve to death. Many more. This is what keeps people alive. This black market capital.
So why don't they actually move on a national level to capitalism?
I would say they are afraid to lose control. And in China they can risk it because well, China is not a divided country. There is no South China. And if there are changes in South Korea, if people are moving towards capitalism, more changes, more openness means better knowledge of South Korea and less fear of the government and less government economic control.
Can't they keep capitalism ideas and keep the country contained?
If this is what Kim Jong Un obviously hopes for, but whether he will succeed or not, it's a good question. I would bet 1 to 4 he will not. Yeah.
What do you think will, oh sorry, my name is Lovey. What do you think will come of the final report of the UNCOI?
Of the human rights?
The UNCOI, the Commission of Inquiry? Like, what do you think should happen or will happen?
North Koreans will, because the problem is, if you are talking about attracting attention to the sorry state of the human rights in North Korea, it makes sense. If you expect any practical changes in North Korea to happen because of this, well, maybe very minor, because they are slightly sensitive to overseas pressure and surprisingly overseas public opinion, but not too much. Very, very mild. So basically, well, they will ignore it as usual and will pay not much attention. They will say just another provocation of the these American imperialists who are as bad, who are actually are very bad themselves, and we of course we are not bad. Yeah. Good. We have seen many things. So, any questions? Yes.
Are there any other countries besides China with which North Korea enjoys sort of close diplomatic relations? I mean,
These China relations are quite strange, as I have said, because as I have mentioned already, with China it's ostensibly good relations. In practice, for example, the North Korean major line of the North Korea says in local intelligence, domestic intelligence and security services, that China is one of 3 major threats, maybe greater threat than United States and South Korea. So people are instructed to be on guard against Chinese spies and Chinese attempts to influence North Korean domestic politics. And they are probably correct, because China has indeed many more opportunities to get involved in North Korean domestic politics than anybody else. Having said that, so China is, well, a sort of approximation to an ally, but it is a great deal of mutual distrust, a remarkably high level of distrust. Well, technically you'll be surprised, there is one country which is always gets positive review in North Korean media, that is Assad Syria. Because, yeah, and they did even have some cooperation on nuclear issues. But it's a sort of symbolic something, of course, nothing serious. They try to present Russia as a friendly country, which is far more complicated, because Russia is a bit like China, but far, far less active on this line. So same policy, same goals, but far less value attached to these goals. So, is this what happens?
I watched, the reason I asked is because I watched a documentary on labor camps, of North Korean labor camps in foreign countries this This
Yeah.
one was specifically in Russia. Where
Yes, it's a place where most of them used to be. Now in China there is a great number. Used to be almost exclusively in Russia, yes?
I was just curious.
So same as I have said, Russian attitude is roughly same as China. The difference is, first, because Russia is a far more democratic country, there is open, essentially they are laughing stock in Russia. And this, Russian media just had a few days after the elections because of this idea of 100% approval. And other thing is that the stakes of Russia are much lower than for China. But talking about labor camps, it's more complicated because people say it's labor camps and they usually present it in a very bad light. You know, slavery. Well, I've never heard about Africans in the 17th century giving huge bribes to the slave hunters to be selected for the next slaving ship. And this is what happened for people who want to go to Russia and now to China, and if they're very lucky, to Eastern Europe, where there are such small camps too. They try not to advertise this fact that there are Czechoslovakia, Poland, Czechia and Poland. Because they are paid salaries which are many times more than average North Korean without good political party connection would ever get. They can come back bringing in such luxury items as motorbikes and fridges. And the money they can send back from Russia or from China, or if they're very lucky and get very good bribes from Poland, will keep not only keep their families extremely well fed, will pay for computer for their beloved daughter, and maybe for her extra language classes, because they are as crazy about education as South Koreans are. So about her classes in maybe modern dance and English. And funny thing talking about Russia now, probably slightly over half, I'm not really in camps. They are associated flag slaves, yeah? So they are allowed to travel across the country within certain limits, looking for their own employment. Usually in very small factories, sometimes just individual employment. Somebody needs to repair a house, and he hires a group of the North Korean boys. I remember the story of one of my Russian friends. She is Korean, ethnic Korean, and because when they were doing renovation a couple of years ago in the Far East, they hired a team of the North Korean builders, and they did a very bad job. And her aunt, who is a professional skilled construction worker, came and asked one of the guys, because they all are Korean speakers, this family, which is somewhat unusual for Russian Koreans, but they are. And they are, what the hell they were doing here, right? And they are kind of one of these 2 or 3 people who are putting the task said, sorry, basically by education I'm a medical doctor. but I work very hard to get selected, and I'm just learning. Well, because the people are sympathetic, say, wow. Unfortunately, not many people are so sympathetic.
Is there potential for, let's say, escaping for, let's say, these people in camps if they go to these predominantly Korean areas? I think, from if I understand, Kyrgyzstan?
Yes, it does happen occasionally. It began to happen in the late 1960s. And I know some people who were like that, who managed to escape. It was very risky, because Soviets usually extradited, but they were not very eager to hunt. So if these people were unlucky to be caught, they were extradited, which usually meant a very painful death. But if they were not, some of them managed to hide for a long time in the Korean villages and reputedly eventually get some fake Soviet IDs, and then perestroika came and they blended into the landscape. I don't know how many such incidents. I have heard such stories from the early mid-1980s. So there must have been few stories like that. I'm not sure. We are talking about dozens of people, maybe very low hundreds, more likely dozens. Right now it's still possible, but the question is that most of these people don't do it because they have families. And these families are essentially hostages. And if you disappear, your family is in trouble. They are not probably going to be punished as severely as it would be the case 10 years ago. But all their career prospects are ruined. If they live in a major city, they are likely to be relocated to the countryside and live a very tough life. So, as a responsible breadwinner, this is not something you would normally consider. It's possible, and some people do. But,
Thanks for your talk. I just want to know if you can answer, what are some of your future interests for your research before you retire? You kind of jokingly mentioned that you're quite old. So before you retire, what are the things that you'd love to do while you work and live in Korea as professor in North
I think
Studies?
it's about 15 to 20 years to my retirement. So I hope there is still a great deal of things to do. But what I would do first, right now, we are writing actually 2 books that might eventually become basically the same topics, slightly different approach. How the daily life in North Korea changed under Kim Jong Un's rule. Because it's very interesting for me. Communism was a brave, noble, extremely bloody, and spectacularly unsuccessful experiment. Driven by the idealists, who killed probably far more people than most cynical people have ever managed to kill, but they were driven by high emotions. Having said that, it's interesting how it developed. But in North Korea, it's interesting to see how this system unraveled. And it happened in a very unusual way, because there are 2 ways out of the state socialism. One is Soviet and East European model. You have a democratic political revolution, and the new government starts dismantling the Soviet system, Soviet-style socialism, replacing it with some variety of market economy. You had Chinese way out. You had a government which stays in control, still waving red flags for the sake of political stability, but essentially introduces capitalism from above. In North Korea only, we had a 3rd variety. Introduction of capitalism from below, sometimes tolerated and sometimes, I strongly suspect, tacitly encouraged by the government, but never open, never lecture. And not always encouraged, sometimes they try to suppress it. And it's a very interesting scenario of how the state socialist experiment might end. And it also shows that for the time being, it might change, and probably I hope it will change, but for the time being, market economy is a natural thing for the humans. It might change in centuries, maybe, probably, hopefully, but not in the future.
Is there any message that you would like to give, if you can, if you could, to the people of North Korea right now?
On North Korea, you are in a serious mess. Don't expect quick fixes.
And what
There
can
is
we
no
do about
magic.
it?
There is no magic bullet. There are ways to make a situation much better than you are now, but don't have exaggerated expectations. Expect a very long time of difficulties, troubles. You know, as Churchill said, blood, tear, and sweat is fire, as I remember. Yeah. This is what I would say, because what I'm afraid of, we are likely, I'm not showing such telling we are certain, but we are likely to have a North Korean revolution. And there will be a wave of revolutionary expectations, which will be completely unrealistic. People will expect a miracle, not going to happen. And then there will be disappointment, and which leads to, arrival of cynicism, corruption, bad governance, and a lot of things. So I would say to North Koreans, you are in a mess. And there is a way out of this mess. Things will probably get better. But don't expect it to get better immediately, and be ready for a very difficult but gradually, genuinely improving situation if you are smart and hardworking.
I think that's the kind of message that when Korea was shattered in war, that's what everyone and the world actually thought, but that's not what happened actually. So I guess I'm a little bit more hopeful for the people of North Korea than you are, I think, just by the sound of it. But anyways.
No, I'm not hopeful. I saw how it's happening. It's illness. Yeah.
So do you think Kim Jong Un comfortably control the nuclear material and potentially nuclear bombs?
It's $1 million question. Seriously looking guys in the CIA and NIS, as well as a lot of other intelligence services worldwide, are extremely well paid to answer. I don't know. Yes, I don't know how he controls the weapons. Right now, my guess is that he's in control and that he controls, but I don't know. And of course, if they have a kind of messy situation, well, God knows.
So how about possibility to make a deal like Korean versions the past memorandum in Ukraine and Russia?
You know what has happened to Budapest memorandum just 1 week ago?
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid it will be the same fate of this deal. I don't mind if it works, but once again, North Koreans don't trust because in the international deals because they have been remarkably easily jettisoned by all great powers. We saw it done by the Americans, we saw it right now seen it being done by the Russians, we will see it done by everybody. So it's a big issue whether they will accept it. I would be supportive, but I don't think it's going to be. I think it's a non-starter.
So those Korean readers already know about that. So Bologna State got lessons from those uncommitment from Russia. When Russia and Ukraine exchanged the deals, the past memorandum, so Russia go to protect Ukraine borders and security, but now they are violating the commitments. So
Yes.
yeah, so North Korean leaders already know about that. So you mean the possibility Korean borders.
It's not the only reason. They would not trust foreign, they don't trust Americans, they don't trust anybody, and with good reasons. And even without this yet another confirmation of their mistrust, they would not get into such a deal unless really present. And they don't see how they can be pressed into such a deal. So frankly, the only diplomatic solution I would consider to be realistic right now is something like, again, a rerun of the 1994 treaty. That is what North Koreans want actually to get, and I don't see why they should not be given it. That is freezing of their nuclear facilities, in exchange for payments. They will not surrender to anything, but they can freeze their developments if they are paid. And I think that in the long run, if they survive in the long run, they probably not, perhaps. It's probably the only diplomatic solution which appears to be realistic.
I think we can take just one more question.
And you can I
Someone do maybe.
Yes, and you.
In your opinion, what are the effective and ineffective things that non-politicians and non-academics are doing now? And what do you suggest?
All kind of interpersonal exchanges in North Korea are good. So if you go there to teach English, right, you are yourself a walking, you are a dangerous information internet. And you are also a useful knowledge internet, because we have to think about changing the system and also about stabilizing the system. You know, all kinds of exchanges, which are good. At the same time, support for the refugee groups are good. And support for, say, broadcast and digital stuff dissemination is good as well. It sounds like a contradiction because, you know, doves always for exchange and sweetness. When I said sweetness, it does not include more money for broadcast, which might be very hostile. Same goal, changing the minds, different methods. So why not? So it's also possible. What is a waste of time? Well, frankly, everything which helps refugees, or everything which helps North Koreans, or everything which brings North Koreans to the contact with the outside world, or dangerous information about the outside world, is good. And there are many ways to do it. So, yeah.
Excellent. If we could give Dr. Lankov just a round of applause. we're actually here until 9 o'clock. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for participating in the event tonight. Before parting ways, I'd like to send out a word to our Speaker Series Committee for helping behind the scenes in setting up tonight's event, and also the National Democracy Institute, NDI,